I got to know the old cemetery, and I happened to come across, William Delk and his son, William P. Delk, and saw their stones. And William P. Delk's is a memorial stone as opposed to a stone for a plot, because he died of illness up north. He didn't die in the war from injury. 28 days after he enlisted, and he had slave siblings, and he had siblings by full siblings, and then he had possibly other slave siblings. There were other slave siblings. And then his slave siblings had half siblings by their slave mothers. And so it's a big conglomeration of people that are all family. And then I met people here in Apopka that I knew had to be family of mine by cousins, and that are both black and white, or a mulatto and white and black. And because they lived in Lower Alabama, LA. And they were within 10 miles of where my father and my grandparents were born. And surprisingly, people in Lower Alabama came here to Apopka for some unknown reason. And Lower Georgia came here to Apopka for some unknown reason. And we look at tracing them back. Now, how do we find when they just have a little hash mark on the census at the plantation? It's just a hash mark, a 1 and an M and a B, or an M and an MU for mulatto, or it's a 2 for 2 people and an F and a B. How do we go back and find out who that was? Well, that's what I've been doing this period of time, along with a lot of other volunteers on WikiTree, to try and find out who these people are and if or not they are related to the slaveholder. And I use the term slaveholder, they're using the term slave owner, because especially with the case of William Delk, I have found out there was a lot of love between him and his descendants. Some of them were a lot of anger, and even with some of the black slave owners, some of them were the most violent, even to their own children. So when you go to read their diaries and read their stories, you'll find out that there's sometimes a lot of love among the slaveholders, and then you'll also see there's a lot of violence among them. In fact, one, he was killed by some of his slaves, and they never found the body. They just went back and told his wife that he was killed. And so there's a tombstone for him, but no grave for him on the property. In the other case, I will show you where William Delk actually signed for his son to get in the Army, and probably turned himself in on an arrest warrant so that his son could get in the Army. And then his son actually came from Sorrento in 1885 and built him a casket, built him a headstone, and a cemetery, and dug a hole and buried him in 1885, 20 years later from being freed. And you don't do that unless there's love after he had been freed. So WikiTree is that free organization that people either just work on their own family or volunteer to help other families find their families and do the history. And some, yes ma'am?
So I have a question for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Because I'm on the Latter-day Saints
Ancestry.
in No.
No, that's not it.
No.
Ancestry's a pay
It's
site.
called
That's right.
FamilySearch.org.
Right.
That's right.
So I'm on FamilySearch.org, which I like because it's free,
Right.
and they populate a lot of stuff in there because of all the members. I'm not Latter-day Saint, but I
Right.
just like the website.
They're a good resource.
I have Ancestry, but I refuse to pay the fees for
Me
Ancestry.
too, yeah.
So, they tell me stuff and I can go on and I can look at stuff, and I had my DNA done. But where I was going with the question is, other people can't add things to my tree without my permission, and does WikiTree work this? Because you're saying you can volunteer to help other people, so how does that work?
In this tree, you can lock it and make for one thing, live people don't show.
Okay.
So you being live, nobody's going to see your information.
Okay.
Once somebody is deceased, then their page shows.
Okay.
So like my father's deceased, so his page shows. It could be locked to trusted people only.
Mm-hmm.
I could let you in on my page as a trusted person, let you see it. And you could add to me if you wanted to, if I let you. So there's trusted, there's like 5 layers of privacy.
Okay. Like
And
somebody can't just randomly go in there and change something on your tree without.
in the tree, yes, up in the
They
tree.
can,
Now there's
okay.
trusted levels and people are watching, and you can hit a mark to say, tell me when somebody makes a change.
Okay.
Keep me informed.
Okay. Because that's what I have now. If there's, we'll say on Ancestry, if other trees have kind of linked up to mine and they've got
Mhm.
some differing information, I'll get an alert and I can view it and I can say, yes, either this is good or it's bogus.
Well,
or-
Ancestry is totally
that's-
separate trees.
Yeah, but there's,
And people make, the very first time I got on Ancestry, I saw where, oh yeah, this says that my direct ancestor is King Henry III. And when I looked at it, and I'm a researcher, I do a lot of research. That's what my doctorate is in education. And the thing that was always said is, trust but verify, not in this. You verify, then you trust. So I saw the lineage, and I said, I don't remember him
doesn't
having
look
a
right.
child by
Yeah.
that name.
Yeah.
So what I went to the official family of King Henry III. And I went down, and he did not have a child by that name. And then I went to that child and looked, and there was no child by that name. So then I went in and went back up in my family. And yes, I am in the family lineage, and King Henry VIII's wife, one of the wives, is one of my grandparents, but not the king
Yeah.
that they were
Yeah.
talking about. So it's a matter of don't trust but verify, and don't just. A lot of people are just clickers on Ancestry, where they click yes, yes, yes,
Yes,
yes,
yes,
yes, accept. Don't do that. And
Okay.
that's what's happened with this program, is that people are accepting what some authors around town, all over, are saying about William Delk. And they said, one has said that the 2 brothers, Joseph and his brother Fraser, went off and joined together. They didn't join together, they joined a month apart. And the one went to Robards, who's Delk, Joseph Delk, the son, who then changed his name to Robards. He actually was sent to Connecticut. And so he didn't fight locally. This happens to be the full page. I took 2 parts, where a man named N.F. Chapman sold Linda to William S. Delk. And this is the whole thing, and I found it by going to the comptroller's office. Now this is free searching also. And what I did was I just went to the comptroller's office, put William Delk in the comptroller's office, and put 1850, which is when he came to Marion County, and 1845, and then went to 18, 85, which I know he died, and it pulled up anything to do in the comptroller's office with William Delk. And up popped Linda. Well, all I know about this other man is N.F. Chapman and the year in which this transaction occurred. Nothing else about him. Well, to find out about him, I put that in Ancestry or in WikiTree. Come to find out, now this is the blow up of it, is N.F. Chapman, William S. Delk is up here. It was a Negro girl slave, about 6, and her name was Linda. And that he got $132.50 in hand before the signing and before he handed the little girl over. And it happened on the 15th of October in 1858 is when the exchange happened in Orange County. And then $132.50 was going to be due on the 1st of January 1859 and 8% interest on that money. Now you're going to see what that is in today's dollars, and you're going to be blown away about what a
on
little
a payment plan.
yeah, and a payment plan, yes. Now I didn't know who this man was. Was this a stranger?
Right.
You know, where did this man come from, etc. Just a total stranger. Well, what I found out by looking around is David Hamilton Delk, who owned a small, tiny farm up in Georgia, and Elizabeth Terrell married, and they had a whole large family. But David Hamilton Delk and William Shelton Delk were brothers, and Francis J. Chapman, they were all in Liberty County and had their children in Liberty County, Georgia, okay, which is down in the bottom edge of Georgia, just above Tallahassee, okay. Mary Lee Lay and Francis J. Chapman married, and they had a bunch of children. And N.F. Chapman was a son, and Mary Lay Chapman was a daughter. Mary Lay Chapman married David Hamilton Chapman, and N.F. Chapman sold the 6-year-old girl to William Shelton Delk. And all I knew was N.F. Chapman, 1859. And by putting that in the search engine on WikiTree and on Ancestry, I came up with all of this and all of the plantations that they owned. And that was free, okay? And Comptroller's office started it off by just typing in William Delk, OCCOMPT.com. And then from there, I can start looking at their slave schedules and then finding where a 6-year-old girl, approximately 6-year-old girl in 1859, go back 6 years and look on the slave schedule for a female born in that 6-year-old range, shows up on the schedule as F, B, or MU. B is what they're saying here. They didn't say MU, mulatto. They said black, because they're going to try, and in selling her, they're going to say if she was MU or B. And so when I go here, I can go and look at his schedule that I prepared. This is links. He had plantations in Marion County and Orange, and on the census is an exact snapshot day. Okay, they had more or less all the time, because children were born, children died, they bought, they sold. But on the date of the census in Marion County, in those years, in Marion County he had 11. Then when he moved to Orange County he had 19. On the census date was 17, but on the day that he sent the slaves free, when he ran away, when they chased him out of Orange County, when he didn't want to pay the money towards the bonds of the Civil War, and the CSA neighbors ran him off, and he hid, He had 19. I'll send this around to you. The actual census, and they were little hash marks, as I said. One person and one little mark down here. And Linda, I was able to back it out and figure out how old she would have been. She was 7 years old there, and they rounded the years based on the day that the census was taken. I found out how old she would have been at the census time. Female, mulatto. And that was little Linda on the 1860 census. And all that came from was that deed with the name Linda right there. I don't know why this is not projecting what I'm doing here.
Justin.
And then, so on WikiTree, and that's according to who filled out the census
Whoever
form.
filled out census,
Yeah.
which-
And they may have just said, okay, she doesn't look completely dark.
Right,
Yeah.
You know, and they don't know where no one's indicating where she came from, who the parents were, anything like that. So what we would have to look is after, that was in 1860. So once we find out who her descendants are, once we do any diary looking, once we start finding out, this is the 1850 census, and you'll see how it relates to that other census, because this was the woman who was born, that was 10 years old, younger in that one. And then this is the Anthony Frazier, the half brother of Joseph Delk, and the two of them went off to war, left the campfire and went up with Dad to St. Augustine. And Joseph Delk was the one that he turned himself in for, to sign the papers for him to join the war. And then the next month, Anthony Frazier, his half-brother, joined the war. So he was the slave that was his son, and this was his slave son, half-brother. And you can tell by the year they were born that 10 years later they were on that schedule. Nah, don't worry about it then. And this was Linda's deed. Now you can find this all on WikiTree. You don't have to take pictures. It'll all be on WikiTree. It's open to the public. I've hung it all, and it's also on that. This stuff is all public record. It's government documents. This is Joseph Delk's intake paper. I'm going to project it here. Let me see. These are the people involved in the arrangements. William Shelton Delk, and you can seek him on there on WikiTree, and you'll have to choose between the other William Shelton Delks. And the more people that get put on WikiTree, the more William Shelton Delks you'll have to find. He had a nephew he was born in 1815 and died in 1885. So you'll have to find the right one. Then I have a page created called William Shelton Delk's Plantations. And then you'll have to look, and then Slaves of William Shelton Delk was the page that I showed you. And then his brother-in-law, his sister-in-law's brother was Nathaniel Francis Chapman.
That's confusing.
And then his father is Francis John Chapman. And then William's dad is David Delk. And again, they all had plantations. Now, all of them had brothers, and they had plantations or farms. Now, David Delk, only had 4. He had 2 at the first census, 2 older, middle-aged ones, which would have near death. I mean, the slaves didn't live awful long, most of them. And then the second census had none, and then the third census showed 2 again, middle-aged. So you see Francis John Chapman only had 8, and Nathaniel Francis had 30 in Georgia. I have not found a listing for Hillsborough yet, but that was where he was probably at the age and time. We don't know where Linda came from yet. Now, when I get to the logistics of Rock Springs is up here, Sorrento is above, there's Clay Springs, what is Clay Springs? Wekiva Springs State Park, Wekiva Springs. And then down here is the cemetery. Okay. And I was talking about the love between slaveholders and slaves, between William Delk and his son. In 1885, William Delk died. Oh, this is a little too small to read, but that's okay. This is the newspaper where his son was interviewed in 1926, and he said, "My unnatural father." Well, he was natural. Something natural happened. He was told, somebody came and told him in 1885 there was no telephone.
This is the reason we're at the
Eh.
museum with the papers.
You can read it in there in the office, that he was interviewed, and he was told in 1885 that he was told his father, somebody had to go get him and tell him that his father was in bad condition and had a horrible death. I would imagine cancer or something like that, some type of awful death. And he came, he built a rugged, crude casket for him, wooden casket, carried him to the cemetery, to the Apopka, and dug a hole for him beside his William P.'s memorial stone, and he made him a very nice headstone, and he described the leaf on it, which we have pictures of, and you can go see. And he dug a hole and he buried his father. Now, 20 years after he was released and freed, that's hard put for me to think that there wasn't love there.
Yeah.
And it's hard put for me to believe that William Delk didn't turn himself in to be arrested, to be able to get his son in the U.S. Army, because his son signed up on the 24th of August, 1864, to get in the U.S. Army, and 2 days later, William Delk was arrested and signed permission for his son to join. Now, his son was a minor and had to have his father's signature. Now, his father signed owner and guardian. Now, by law, he couldn't say father. He couldn't admit to being the father of a black child. But did he just sign owner? He didn't just sign owner. He admitted to being his guardian. And to me, that's a real big sign of love there. So I think that, and you know, Sorrento's way up here.
Yeah.
Look at all that traveling he did to bury his father, and then go way back up there. And then again, this was the first census I found, and there was no identification of any of these people a week ago. I found Betty Reese by reading an article, a report saying that Betty Reese and her 5 children were with him, were slaves of his. And I found out her age and when the date of her birth, and that lined up exactly with a 40-year-old slave in 1850. And then I went back and found Anthony Frazier's age, and it lined up exactly with that 1926 article that Joseph Delk spoke of the age of his brother.
In the newspaper, they spelled Delk with an E on the end. Is that
Yeah,
a typo or is that
everybody spells
all
things
different?
differently,
Okay.
but he spelled it Delk, and
E, okay.
and they spelled it Delk in old documents when they were alive. So everybody, literacy back then,
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah.
asking because I've noticed that with other,
here's his
Searches.
signature, here's William Delk's signature, and Joseph Delk had an X back then, but later on he did learn to write. That's William Delk's at the bottom signature. He spelled it without the E. A lot of censuses spelled it with an E, so everybody had a different level. Joseph Delk, he lined up exactly with 3 at that date. And then here is Betty 10 years later, lined up perfectly as his first slave. Anthony Frazier lined up with the same date. And now another thing of talking about William Delk, of being a kind person. How many people would have kept a blind 16-year-old slave?
Yeah.
What could he have done? And look at this one down here, a 4-year-old idiot.
Oh, yeah.
Idiot.
How many people would have kept an idiot slave? Okay? Except a kind man. And down here it says that there were 5 houses for these slaves. And this one was a brand new child, just born. Right there, 0 out of 12 months, brand new child. Now, this was another plantation that friends of mine, their ancestors, both great grandmother and grandfather were from, and that was the spelling of Choctaw back then. It wasn't with a W, even though the census modernly says with a W. That's our modern spelling of it, why they put it on there back then, and the census wasn't that way back then. Was Alan Caldwell Yates and his son Alfred Caldwell Yates, and they had he had 103 at the time, and I found at 2 o'clock in the morning last Wednesday morning, after seeking since 2006 their ancestors, which I happen to be cousins to both the slaves and the slaveholders on both farms. I am a relative of Delks, Chapmans, and Yates, and to the slaves, because you're able to go on here and find out who you're related to. So I happen to be related to this guy, and I'm probably related to a bunch of y'all. Earl Nelson is from, and I told him as soon as I found out where he was from, I did his ancestry. I did Betty Land's ancestry back 10 years ago. And I did hers. People ask me questions. When I did Earl's, before I did his, I says, I know we're related. Look where you're from, Lower Alabama. And within about 2 days, I found out how closely related we were. And so it just takes a few minutes to figure it out. But when you look at these families, I don't know why it should automatically have sent it to the screen when you click it. But you'll see that once you put up a picture here, there it goes. the previous census where, in Washington County, Alan Yates had a farm. He had originally he came from Virginia. And Powhatan Yates was from what's a Powhatan Indian? The first ones to see the white man. The little girl that stood on the shore and welcomed the white man. Remember her name, Pocahontas? That's where I got a condition from, myasthenia gravis. The chief of the Powhatans was identified as having myasthenia gravis. And Powhatan was the tribe of Pocahontas. And so this young man came from there. And he is either, and he's an ancestor of some people here in Apopka. And my cursor has disappeared. Oh no, what happened here? Oh, it's gone finally. Yay!
There it is.
I guess I gotta pounce on it. So he is either this person here in Washington, because he had slaves in Washington and Choctaw at the same time, but different ones. So he's either this 20-year-old or that 20-year-old. I don't know which, and we're gonna have to do some more work, but the 1-year-old became his wife. And I don't know which one of the 20-year-olds, but Dicey became his wife. And I was talking earlier about value. I didn't tell you the value of that one child, but these are all the different. Lydia Yates is one I found. And Lydia Washington Yates is right there. And I found some siblings and put a family together there. And so now then, their descendants can find their ancestors and then can find their parents and find their entire chain. And that's the purpose of this, is that their descendants can find where, and then they can go up there. And I have found the maps for some of these locations. And I don't know, there. This is the Delk, where David Delk, the father's plantation was. So then I have the maps of the state of Georgia, the state of Alabama. They can actually go to and find the farm that they were on. And a lot of them, their descendants still live in the community.
Sure.
And many of them got, that you ever heard 40 acres. But there's all different families, and I've worked with many different families. So you can't rely on listening to what one family's results are. And you might not find a family. So if you're looking for your family, you hope you're gonna find it and keep looking. Sarah Mead. They came down here and worked hard in the wood building, the crate building with the wood, and she did her building the housing up here. Well, what did her daughter do? Her daughter got an education and became a school teacher at Cookman. That became Bethune-Cookman, but that was up in Jacksonville. Her mother went back up to be with her in Jacksonville and remarried. But her daughter went from being a slave's daughter to being a teacher and was highly educated and went to teach at a prestigious school. And there's no limitations. And that's what this can tell them, is where they came from. And that's the whole purpose. And adopted a lot of kids. There was a lot of adopted kids in the Mead family. It was very interesting to find that when I was doing their research, was how many kids were in Sarah Mead's family, adopted it, and in her daughter's family. It was just amazing to see the number of adopted kids in that. When we look at trying to find these people, all you need is basic information. When I first start off, especially if I start in Ancestry, get as many names, birth dates, death dates, and locations as you can get. Because especially like with the Delks and the Yates and the Chapmans, fathers name their children after themselves, and in the name of the Delks, the father had 2 sons named after him. The first wife named a son David Delk, and then the second wife named a son David Delk. So there are 2 David Delk, and then genealogists named them juniors, Junior 1 and Junior 2. Well, they weren't named Junior.
Right.
They didn't do that back, then. They were just David Hamilton Delk, David Hamilton Delk. So there were 3 David Hamilton Delks in the same family. They just had different birth and death dates. Some don't have true death dates. Like we haven't found an exact death date for William Shelton Delk. Well, there was another William Shelton Delk here in Orange County that died later, his nephew, Dr. William Shelton Delk. Well, then somebody in a genealogy group that's published put doctor in front of this William Shelton Delk. But then in a phone book, I found Dr. William Shelton Delk died in the 1900s, which happened to be his nephew. Try and print everything out, write it down, and compare it to what you're doing online, because when you try and look at it online, you get lost. Don't just click and accept things online because somebody else messed it up or deliberately made it look, wrote things down and accepted things because they want it to look good. Verify, then trust. When people, especially if it's military, those military jackets for Joseph Delk, you always go with their birth name. He was Joseph Delk at birth. He was not Joseph Roberts. Roberts was what was used in the newspaper article. Robards was the name he took later on in life. He said to get away from the Delk name because Delk was not appreciated by the neighbors here after the war. He was well loved before the war. You're required to use the birth name when you set up a site. And then since he did use a second name, you put in the second name there as an alternate name, a later name used. So on Joseph, let's see, go back up here. Let's see. Control. Come on. Okay, if we go up, go down here, slide down, come on. Well, I don't want to go to slaves. Where is his children at hiding? Oh no, this is his slaves. Let me go to him. And then we have his children here. And see how, even though I entered Delk as his birth name, this is how they do females too, is that your maiden name would be in a parenthesis, and then your married name would be out there. I don't care for that, but here, this is what I was showing, is that the front page of a military sheet, most people, when you do a military search, and for like the Civil War, it's a whole packet of every quarter that he gets paid, and it says if he missed days, he was sick and stuff. People grab that first page when they do a search, and it says, oh, the day they signed, like he was 18 years old. For men, 18 years old is a minor back then. They had to be 21. But a female was an adult at 18. Okay? Female was an adult, male was 21. So they didn't realize when they started writing genealogies about him in local books that his daddy had to sign him in, but they didn't go the 20 pages back
Right.
and read the signature I got here. This was at the back of the document. And so then when I looked at all the additional pages, it showed how sick he was, how little money he made. You know, his brother was an adult and made a lot of money and earned, you know, he only did 2 years. See, it says a term of 3 years. When you get back to Daddy's signature, Daddy scratched out 3 years and put in 2 years. And I guess it's also because of him being a minor, but Daddy scratched out 3 and wrote 2 if you read it. Plus, he didn't get the full $300 that they normally got for the sign-on bonus. He only got the 100. Plus, he didn't get the extra 100 for the extra work, as he was out sick most of the time. Also, the guess that he fought locally was not true, because on the second page it said that he was sent to Connecticut to fight. And maybe that was why he got so sick, as he was up there in the snow. So there's that's again the verify, don't just trust. Is you've got to read all of the document, and when you pull up a page, keep reading, keep reading. So that was another point I wanted to make. And so you can see that there are additional pages. That's not one of absent, and they're talking about
Sick.
no orders, absent, sick in general hospital. And there's page after page after page of the dates he missed. And this is where he had a second wife, and he had 3 young girls he was rearing alone as a widower. And the streets, I found all this in census data by reading the census data. And then this is part of the interview. And of course, you know, you have to cite on WikiTree. They will erase it if you don't do citations. It's not like on Ancestry where you're writing your own little story in your private tree. This is a public tree. And that's what these little marks are here, is that I put a citation in, and down below is a citation, and hopefully a link to your citation. But a citation that you found it in Perrine Slim's book, page 20, you know, Schaffner's book, page 5. Well, you got to take Schaffner's book with a grain of salt, because it's not documented properly. There are some errors in it because they did not go and look up some of the citations. They just took them at face value. I have found some of them I looked up that were not the truth. And I found them out this week when I went to cite some of this. So you have to really, again, verify before you post it. And that, as a publisher and as writing my dissertation and doing my research at the university, you have to go and double verify everything you put in print. And as a publisher, I found out that I had authors that when I went to go publish their book, I had to tell them, you have to take this out. I'm not going to publish it because I don't want to get sued because you wrote this and it's not the truth. So you'll want to verify what you put up there. If not, if they find out it's wrong, blasphemy, they'll take it down. And here's where you got 10 acres Now, if you cite it and it's really there in writing, then it's the truth if you cite it, you know, if that's the truth. And then this is the article that you just passed around, was the May,
But
13
Dr.
May.
Dr. O, a lot of the history is a verbal history in the case. So many of the history written in some of our books here are oral histories of what people actually recall about this ancestor.
He said, right, he said with quotes, and that's what I did up here, is that I wrote, he said, and then cite where you got it from.
Yes.
Like the Apopka Chief, 13 May 1926, page 1 and 8.
Mhm.
I did that. He said, but if you have someone who publishes a book and then surmises, and then you find out that when you go back and read the document, and that was not in that document whatsoever, then that surmising gets them in trouble. You know, because if they didn't go up and join together, and they actually joined a month apart, and then the one went to Connecticut and didn't fight locally, and they write, I guess they fought locally.
People
It's
never
teaching people wrong history.
History.